Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Our guest today is an author of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, Radical Candor. Prior to being an author, she led AdSense, YouTube, and DoubleClick online sales and operations at Google. And then she joined Apple to develop and teach a leadership seminar. She has been a CEO coach for Dropbox, Twitter, Pig Games, Qualtrics, Torch.io, and several other tech companies. Her name is Kim Scott. In the last episode, we talked about how Kim started her career in tech and what inspired Kim to write her best-selling book, Radical Candor. In this episode, we'll focus more on how to practice radical candor so you can become a better leader at work. Please enjoy. Your story is resonating with a lot of founders. After starting a company, a founder has to instantly managing a team and even manage people that are more senior than them. However, if you're giving a lot of feedback to someone, maybe you hired the wrong person in the first place. If you're running a startup, don't have much resources, have to work with what you have. What's a realistic way to make it work? How do I give feedback efficiently but not harsh enough to make people leave? As I mentioned the story of Ross giving people feedback at Google, Google has the resources to hire whoever. He can motivate people on his team to train them skills so the team member can start a spirulina farm. But if I were hiring people for my startup, I have to motivate them to work passionately together in the next 3 to 5 years. How do I motivate them then?
Yeah, it's really, really a great question. So one thing I'd like to say is that even if you hire the very most talented person in the whole world, you still need to talk to them. Like, I think a big mistake that people make about management is they think, I'm just going to hire the right people. And then if I can do that, I'm just going to get out of their way and not talk to them anymore. And that's kind of like saying, I'm just going to marry the right person and then not spend another minute with them. Like, that's not a recipe for a happy marriage. So in many ways, feedback is communication. And no matter who you hire, you've got to communicate, and you've got to communicate well. So so I think one of the things that I think part of your question was, how can, no matter whether I've hired someone who is the ideal person, or maybe I'm in a situation where I can't hire the ideal person, how can I give feedback in a way that's going to help people succeed? And so I think there's a few ways to think about it. The first is consider the order of operations of Radical Candor. And this is really important. It doesn't start, Radical Candor is not about the boss criticizing the employee. I think that's a common misperception. Radical Candor starts with soliciting feedback. So don't dish it out until you prove you can take it. So start by asking all of your employees what you could do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with you, because relationships are always two-way streets. And if feedback is, or as I call it in the book, guidance is, it's not a monologue, it's got to be a dialogue. So start by asking for criticism in particular. And when you get it, reward the criticism. You've got to, if you think about it, people take a big risk to criticize you, especially if you're the founder of a company, if you're the boss. And unless you reward that richly, you will never get it again. It's like people also are going to put money in you, in your company, because it's a high risk investment. They're going to expect a big return on their investment. Same thing with criticism. People are going to expect a big return on that investment. So make sure you give them that big return. And so that's number one. Number two is about giving it, and give both praise and criticism. Your job, especially as the founder of a startup, is to paint a picture of what's possible for people and to help them see the vision that is in your head. And praise, it turns out, is a much better tool for that than criticism. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on the good stuff. There's all kinds of research that shows you should give 3 times as much praise, 5 times as much praise, 7 times as much praise. I'm not worried so much about the ratio, but you want to make sure that your praise is really specific and really sincere. If helpful hint, if it's something you would say to a dog, it's not good praise. Good job, not good praise. And then you want to also give criticism. And when you think about how to give criticism, think about these sort of attributes of well, this is actually true for praise and criticism. Think about this in terms of 2-minute impromptu conversations. I'm not talking about some kind of complicated process you have to roll out. These are the things you say in between meetings. The best praise and the best criticism I've ever gotten in my career has happened in walking to the next meeting, right, with somebody. So don't think about it in terms of I've got to save it up for some 360 process, or I got to save it up for a one-on-one. Say it right away. And think about it in terms of being humble. I call it candor and not truth, because to me, candor kind of says, here's what I see. What do you see? It's a conversation. So be humble, state your intention to be helpful, say it right away. Don't wait. When we're through with COVID, say it in person. In the meantime, say it over video. 80% of communication, 90% of communication is nonverbal. So you want to offer it in a way that you can see how the other person is responding and adjust how you're talking accordingly. You want to criticize in private, praise in public. And last but not least, make sure that neither your praise nor your criticism is about someone's personality. You want to make sure that you're giving people both praise and criticism about things. In the case of praise, it can be repeated. Criticism, specific things they can change. A really good way to think about it is the Center for Creative Leadership has a model they call situation, behavior, impact. And that's a good way to make sure you're not criticizing someone's personality, but you're talking about something they can change.
Yeah, totally. I love what you said about you need to give praise along with feedbacks. When you're on the receiving end, how do you select which feedback you need to take actions on and which ones are given based on the giver's personal interest?
So I think when you solicit feedback, you want to make sure, and you disagree with the feedback, you want to make sure you do the following things. First of all, look for the 5 or 10% of what the person said that you do agree with, because you want to show that you're not shut down the feedback. You want to demonstrate that you're not defensive, and give voice to the parts about the feedback that you do agree with. So that's really important. Next, say for the rest of it, I want to think about it and I want to get back to you. And last but not least, it's really important to get back to the person and to talk to them about why you disagree with their feedback, because it is ignoring someone has never improved any relationship ever, right? If you say, thank you for the feedback, then you disagree with it. And that's all you say. What the person hears is F you. So what you want to do is you want to offer a respectful explanation of why you disagree. Disagreements are uncomfortable, but a disagreement that's held with respect can actually improve a relationship. Ignoring what somebody tells you never improves a relationship. That's kind of what to do when you disagree. How to know when you agree or disagree? There's no, I don't have an algorithm for that. But my advice would be to always be open, and that's why I say wait a day or two before you explain why you disagree. But you will disagree with some feedback. There was one CEO who I was coaching, well-known CEO, And it was sort of my job to gather feedback from the team and make sure that he was hearing it. And he, at one point, he was doing something and the team didn't think he should be doing it. And I told him, and he said, I reject that feedback. Just like instantly. But, which was good. Like sometimes you are going to, but he didn't just ignore the team. He addressed why he was doing what he was doing. And not everybody agreed with him after he explained it, but at least they understood. At least they felt heard. He had sort of made his listening tangible.
Yeah, like you said, explaining why you don't take certain feedback is super important for team communication. At least it will help people understand your situation better. In terms of building programs to improve people giving and receiving feedbacks, what do you think is the most efficient way to practice radical candor, especially in the current situation when work primarily happening online?
Yeah. It's harder. It's definitely harder now, but it's more important than ever, I think. So one of the things that I would suggest, specific things I would suggest that founders do is keep having one-on-ones with each of your direct reports. And at the end of the one-on-one, solicit feedback. A tweak you might consider making to your one-on-ones with each of your direct reports is to have shorter, more frequent feedbacks. There's something strange has happened to time in this period, which and like a week seems like a month and a day seems like a minute. I don't know. So I think shorter, more frequent one-on-ones and soliciting feedback in the one-on-ones is important. You want to make sure that you're praising people publicly. I think that's really important. So when you have all hands meetings over Zoom, make sure you're focusing on the good stuff right now. There's so much bad news. And I think for an awful lot of us, at least certainly for me, work is my refuge from all of the terrible news in the world. And so helping people focus on the good things that are happening at work is it's important for the work, but it also is important for people in their lives right now. I think you want to make sure that you're leaving some slack time between, don't book up back to back on Zoom, because then you don't have enough slack time in between meetings to pick up the phone and call someone. Ideally, again, a video call, but if you can't do that, at least a phone call, and offer the little impromptu moments of criticism that are part of management. I also think that you want to encourage people to offer radical candor to each other. And one of the best ways that I have found for leaders to do that is to think about that moment in your career when someone told you something that stung a little bit in the moment. And even though it stung a little bit in the moment, it stood you in good stead for the next 10 years. And use that story. Make yourself a little vulnerable, a little human, and use that story to explain the radical candor framework to your team. So in the book, I tell a story about a moment when I was working at Google, when I gave this presentation, and I was so proud of myself. And afterwards, my boss, who was Sheryl Sandberg, told me that I said, every third word, and it made me sound stupid. And so this was a cringe moment for me. It was hard for me to hear that, but it really stood me. It was the kindest thing she could have done for me at that moment in my career. And so when I tell that story, it kind of opens people up to say, this kind of criticism is hard to hear, but it's valuable to hear. So offer that, tell your story to your team. If you want to, we also have developed with Second City, the improv group, a wonderful workplace comedy, which you can buy for your team, and you can watch it together, and it'll help you all understand what radical candor is and what it isn't. The comedy, of course, comes in people getting it wrong, and so it's called Improvising Radical Candor. So check it out. Check out the feedback.
Yeah, I love that you mix improv with coaching. I saw on your website that you and your team provide services like workshops, keynotes, and courses for startups, bigger tech companies. You started with a best-selling book and spread the message to all these amazing companies and executives. What's next for you?
Yeah, so it's funny. When I wrote the book, when I wrote Radical Candor, part of what inspired me to write it was because I was a CEO coach. And that didn't scale. The goal, of course, is to help people change their behavior. Help people. The goal is not just to describe the ideas, but to turn the ideas into realities. And so I thought, well, I could be the coach to millions of people if I wrote a book and they read the book. And so I thought of the book as the thing that was going to help a lot of people make a change. But of course, then people wanted more. So we tried an app. The app didn't work. If the idea of Radical Candor is to put your phone in your pocket, look people in the eye, and have a real conversation, the app was kind of a value subtracting round trip. But we found that some of the things that do help are talks, giving talks, doing workshops. Some companies have done book clubs and will join for a Q&A after people read the book. And then part of what we've done is to build this sort of office comedy and this online course that helps people learn in a way that's fun and entertaining, but also educational. We learn when we laugh, and I think we could all use a little more laughter right now at this time in history. So that's another thing we've done. Another thing that's next is one of the things that I'm embarrassed to say I didn't touch on enough in Radical Candor is shortly after the book came out, I was working with a company, and I made an offhanded joke about how Radical Candor was a guerrilla feminist text. And then I realized, why am I being clandestine in a book about candor? What's going on there? And one of the things that people told me in a lot of different ways is that Radical Candor works really well, but it's easier for white men than for anyone else. And so that really got me to thinking, how can I think about what sort of workplace injustice and how that interferes with Radical Candor? And that's the topic of the next book, Just Work. So Just Work, which you can buy now. It will not be delivered to you until March 16th, but please buy it now. Just Work is about sort of how we can break down workplace injustice, how we can distinguish between bias, prejudice, bullying, discrimination, harassment, and physical violations. All of these things are very different attitudes and behaviors that demand different responses. So how can we distinguish between these things? And what are the things that we can do as leaders, as people harmed, as people who cause harm? Sometimes all of us, exhibit these behaviors and attitudes in different ways. And as observers, how can we become upstanders? So what are the things we can do to interrupt these attitudes and behaviors in the workplace so that we can all just work?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited about the book. We're at the last part of our interview. I have 3 questions for you. Who made the biggest impact in your life? Who would you invite to your dinner party? And besides Just Work and Radical Candor, what book do you recommend us to read?
So the biggest impact in my life is my family, my husband and my two kids. I have twins. Really... Yeah, twins. They're 11 years old now. It has been, I think, one of the sort of misconceptions about work and life is that it'll be so much harder. This was one of my fears before I had kids, that it'll be so much harder to do the best work of my life when I have to balance. And it turns out I've done the best work of my life after my kids were born. So you can really integrate your work in your life. So I want to give a shout out for that. Who would I invite? If I could invite anyone, I would invite Virginia Woolf to my dinner party. I realize she's not alive, but she is my hero. I love Virginia Woolf. Well, my favorite book is probably Mrs. Dalloway. So written by Virginia Woolf. The two are connected. One of the things I would recommend to people is not only reading books about management, but reading novels. I think reading novels really expands your ability to feel empathy for all different kinds of people, and that will make you a better leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can we find you if you're not at work?
If I'm not at work, you can find me. Well, you can find me pretty much the same place all the time right now, which is
at
either
home.
in the shed in my backyard, or at home. But in normal times, I am out hiking when I'm not at work. I love to be out hiking. Or I spend, actually, I'm kind of a homebody even in normal times.
Same.
I like to, I'll be curled up in bed reading a novel or having a meal with my family, or sometimes a dinner party.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show, Kim. I'm so excited to, tell everybody about Just Work.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
That is music to a writer's ears. That books are definitely word of mouth. So thank you for spreading the word.
All right, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. If you like it, please leave us a quick review and hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to receive our updates, please leave your email at smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are at Grace Gong GG. Besides LinkedIn, it's just Grace Gong. I'd love to connect with you and let me know your thought about the show. Now you can also listen to Smart Venture Podcast on YouTube. Go to smartventurepod.com, click the YouTube link on the top banner. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash the like button. See you next time.